feeling cold for a prolonged time as marker for fat loss. So in the last couple of years, I sometimes try to reduce my amount of fat. Now, I try to search for basically hints that this occurred. Now, first I want to discuss the cold, then I want to discuss something else, which seems to be the sensing of buildup of fat, or the sensing of a loss of fat, which seems to coincide very weirdly with also then visual changes, and therefore I, at this point in time, already kind of trust this sensation. Now, the first part of this is now feeling cold for a prolonged period of time. Now, the question is, how much underlies this? So, if one feels cold, then in my experience now, digestion already is at a stage where it basically has already ended and the body is not overheating from food any longer. If one then is cold, it also means that the body does not want to expend additional energy for basically. So if the body is cold, then it is in a situation in which it could basically expend additional energy as thermal energy, so basically blow off this energy as thermal energy, which it otherwise would have to store as fat or something like this. Mostly fat, if the carb stores or the glycogen stores are already full. So it seems to be the case that whenever I feel cold for a prolonged period of time, this could be anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours, that then this induces a period of fat loss, which then also I often at the next morning can visibly see. Now, what also has been a marker for basically this thesis, or not necessarily, it has been a confirmative observation for this thesis that feeling cold seems to be one of the most useful markers for actual fat loss occurring, is that whenever I sleep on the colder side, I wake up reasonably more, so visually leaner compared to otherwise. If I sleep hot, for example, then I often also sleep worse, which then again might be a correlation. So sleeping colder might also introduce better sleep, but then the better sleep might also introduce basically or induce basically more fat loss at night. But I think to a certain extent one could then still take the feeling of cold, not necessarily the freezing part. It seems to be the case, at least in my experience, if I'm too much on the side of actually properly freezing, then my body induces a somewhat of a shutdown process in which I might still basically burn fat, but what also might be happening is that it then becomes harder to basically sustain the current activity I do, because what seems to be happening is that my body then induces a period in which it tries to basically not expend too many calories. So if I do cold exposure in winter and I'm outside running, maybe in a tank top and shorts, then what seems to afterward often be the case that for many hours I am too much basically in this phase in which I basically am somewhat cold. My hunger is also slightly reduced, not slightly reduced, but it is basically not existent at this point in time. And then my stomach also might have already shrunken, because the extended fasting means that my stomach already has shrunken. So if my body then, on average at least, has a certain nutrient need, then it needs to kind of make up for this nutrient need. Now if this is in the morning, then I might still have a couple of hours, but I also might have these phases in which I then, it's also depending on how the cold basically affects the performance. But now there might be a period, and this happens maybe once a week, maybe 2 or 3 times every 2 weeks, but it seems to be the case that then for multiple hours of the day I am somewhat hungry, very slightly hungry, but I cannot really eat. And if I then eat, I get sick to a certain extent, and then I go into what one could call the keto flu, which then would be a state of sickness that it results, not necessarily results, but seems to correlate with basically deeper states of fat burning. Now, the second marker now I wanted to discuss is the sensation. I, for now many years, have tried to figure out, with taking notes and also with tracking calories every now and then, and also with other observations, or mostly taking notes, whether this actually correlates with the burning of fat on the one side, but also the buildup of fat on the other side. So it seems to be the case that, especially if I'm higher in carbs, that it basically can be the case that I build up fat, or maybe it's also a change in how much subcutaneous water I have. I don't necessarily know to which extent I can see this, but what seems to be the case is that if I basically overeat And also, I overeat in fat and carbs, which seems to be a combination. So if I eat something that's very sugary and also very fatty, then I get basically sensation subcutaneously on also the areas in which the fat buildup seems to be most likely to happen. So this could be, for example, sometimes in the lower abs, this could be sometimes basically on my legs, and also sometimes in other areas as well, such as my face and so on and so forth. This could also be something else, and I looked into many other explanations already. So if one has a very high blood sugar, this seems to be also damaging to the blood vessels. So this might also be something like this, where I have something that is quite high in simple sugars, which I maybe am not used to, or I don't know, what seems to be the case is that I have this slight tickling sensation, and I also have it on the other end. If I am very deep in a ketosis, as marked, or in fat burning, let's just say, not necessarily ketosis, then what also seems to be, so also maybe marked by a cold, not a cold, but by being cold, by feeling cold. And now one could say, okay, these are all just subjective observations. Then, so first of all, to finish now the previous sentence, if all of this happens, then I also have on the other end the sensation of basically a slight tickling sensation in areas in which then also there seems to be a correlation with basically a visual change in appearance. So if I have a certain muscle tone in a given area, then it seems to be the case that then the skin that overlays this, and also the subcutaneous fat layer seems to be slightly reduced, at least as far as I can visually see this. Now there are obviously many questions. Are there even sensors in the fat cells that could basically give me an actual feedback? Is this something else? Is this maybe that I'm feeling that insulin or high blood sugar, for example, or low blood sugar actually causes something like this? Is this the blood vessels opening up or closing down, or is this something that I could actually sense, or is this, I don't know. It seems to be the case that this has been now happening for years, and so what I have been trying to do is try to figure out what this is. But apart from this, I think the cold is, at least for me, kind of the best marker of me losing fat. And if I'm very much overheating, then this might be an indication that I actually am building up fat. But of course, one could also be overheating due to exercise. But of course, what I'm talking about here is then after food, if I'm then overheating very much and I begin to sweat, then this might be an indication that at least my body has too many calories, which it doesn't know what to do with.